started, let me tell you a little bit how I interact with UX people. I work with Kevin, Tobias, and some of the other people around here. And basically what we need to do is when you guys create your wireframes or you do your studies, user studies and things, we now have to take all that information and actually build the system for the user. So a lot of that times when we go build the system, we start asking the questions that matter to developers, like what platforms you need to work with, or if it's a web, what browsers you need to work with, or if it's a system, well, how do I get the data to do this? Or I was just talking to another one of the persons here. A lot of times we'll have something on our wireframe that says send email. Well, that's a very simple operation for you guys to put there, but from a developer point of view, there's 40 steps involved in sending an email. So it's understanding the context of what the user is trying to do and things like that. So today, what I thought would be good to do is, we all have mobile devices, right? Does anyone here who does not have a mobile phone or a mobile smartphone? Yeah, this is 2014, we all do. But as a developer, there are certain challenges that come involved with being able to take and build out mobile solutions. Unfortunately, there are several different things we need to deal with. First of all, it's a mobile world. There's the days of being able to have your big desktop or even your laptop, those days they're dying away. We have phones, we have tablets, we now have Google Glasses, you have watches, you have even gaming systems that can get on the web. The idea of what is a computer to a user is greatly changing. And eventually we'll end up into the whole world of Star Trek where you just walk up and say, hey computer, I want to do this, perform this operation for me. Or you'll be virtualized into what you're doing. So software development is greatly changing from the developer point of view, but also to the end user's point of view. And we live in a world, like I said, it's very mobile. We also live in a world where there's not one device fits all. You may have a phone, it's an iPhone, but you may have a mobile device that is a Android device. You may still have a traditional desktop computer, it's a Windows device. Or like I said, maybe you have Google Glasses, or maybe you have an Xbox One or a PlayStation 4. You have lots of different devices. And as a developer, when someone comes to you, the first thing we ask them is, well, what devices do you want to support? What do you want those devices to do? And like you guys do when you're UX, you ask the same kind of questions. Because obviously on a phone, it's an entirely different user experience than if it's on a big 23-inch monitor or a big screen like this. Software development is trying to catch up in order to be able to build these great solutions. And as a developer, like I said, the first thing you need to decide is what platform. Then you have to decide how you go about doing it. We can go build native applications for all the different platforms, which usually require about 6 different sets of tools and 6 different skill sets. There are times when that solution is necessary. And usually what ends up happening, you're like, oh, well, version 1 we build in iOS. Version 2 we do Android, and maybe eventually if Windows Phones ever becomes popular enough, we'll build that version. The problem is, we just had a customer who was like this. They had some people who want BlackBerry. There were 3 people who wanted BlackBerry. But they were 3 of the most important people. Can't ignore them. So you have to look at alternative solutions. Well, there's one. It's existed primarily for the last 20 or so years. It's HTML. And HTML isn't like the HTML of 20 years ago. Now it's evolving into being able to build full feature applications. And what you can do as a developer, but even you guys as UX, since HTML is fairly easy to get started as laying screens out and stuff, you can go down a native platform with iOS, Android, whatever. Or you can go to the other extreme, which is you write everything into a web type solution. Or there's this sort of hybrid solution where you use other technologies in cases where you could take HTML and marry it into the native world. What we're going to focus on today, though, is the HTML5 and talk about what HTML5 is, how it fits into the mobile world, and look at the framework's called jQuery Mobile, and how, even from a UX point of view, you guys can understand what these platforms do and what the capabilities are and how you can help users build mobile solutions. HTML5 is everywhere, for lack of a better word. It exists everywhere, except in the world of corporate America. So the first thing I go to is when I go to a customer, because I'm basically a software consultant. They're like, I want to build an HTML5 application. I go, what web browsers? Well, we have IE 7 and 8. I'm like, well, you're not building an HTML5 application. When are you going to upgrade? Unfortunately, they made some decisions 10 years ago. They're like, well, we standardize on that. Then we have people like, well, all right, we're going to switch over to Chrome. And I'm like, okay, that's good. It's a good choice. But they're like, we're going to standardize on Chrome 26 and never change. I'm like, well, then in 5 years from now, you'll have that same problem. So this is another aspect from an enterprise point of view, is technology is moving fast. The days of being able to make a decision 3 years ago and stick to it just aren't practical. Every year or so, even in some cases every 5 or 6 months, there's going to be new technology and things you need to work with. This is one of the reasons why HTML5 is very attractive to us as developers, Because it can work everywhere, it's much easier to adapt it quickly to other platforms. If today I go out and build an iOS app, and I have to use something called Objective-C to do that, and then 3 months later, the customer comes to me and says, oh no, all our salespeople, they bought Android devices. What are we going to do? Well, we can say, okay, well, we'll stop what we're doing and start building the Android version. If you standardize on something like HTML5, we can go, okay, there are changes we need to make, but we're already at a starting point. It's very easy for us to adapt to those changes. There is a couple of points I want to make before we move too far along. Number one, HTML5 is wrong. Everything you've heard about HTML5 is incorrect. HTML5 is more of a wave of things that's going to happen. So what I mean by that is we're day 3 of a 100-day journey. Web browsers are starting to adapt to HTML5. All the mobile devices utilize HTML5. But all the capabilities that we need to build very rich applications that you would expect in a native platform are all there. Or they may work on certain things on iOS, may work on Android, certain other things may not work. So it's not a silver bullet. And it's really, when we say HTML5, it's encompassing of several different technologies. It's obviously more modern web browsers that have these capabilities. It's a number of JavaScript frameworks and things that also provide us tooling to do all this stuff. And then it's also CSS and things like that. And the reason why I bring those stuff up is, as a developer, HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS don't do much. They were all designed for very simple solutions. They were very simple solutions. HTML was designed to be able to link off to different documents. I always tell people JavaScript was designed to make blinking text on the screen. And CSS was designed as an attempt to make things easier to design things. In today's world, we utilize all these technologies together into one thing. And that's really what HTML5 is about. It's encompassing all these technologies. So when you go to build a mobile solution, and you've made a decision, all right, HTML5 is what I want to do. I want to be able to harness this stuff. The next thing you need to do is, do you start from scratch, or do you try to utilize one of the frameworks out there? And in the mobile landscape, one of the better ones is a thing called jQuery Mobile. And these are sort of the high level, what it can do. This is more developer-centric than anything else. But to you guys, it's very touch optimized, which I think in the mobile landscape is the better way to describe things. It's not necessarily the mobility of something, it's the ability to touch it. Because even laptops or even desktops now, they have touch-enabled devices or touch-enabled screens. You could even look at something like an Xbox One or a PlayStation 4 where they have the ability to do the non-controllers, use your hands with Connect and things like that. In many ways, that's also touch. So you have to be able to deal with the reality that the user isn't using a mouse anymore or isn't using a keyboard anymore. So the traditional ways we did development, which is respond to a click event, respond to a keyboard event, they're not the same thing. So jQuery Mobile gives us a good way to deal with that in a very consistent way across all the different browsers. Because the unfortunate thing with HTML, every browser is different. It's a whole different platform, different things work in different ways, and you need some kind of framework. Because if you start from scratch, you'll spend months trying to build a framework. It's better to try to adopt something. So one of the reasons why I like about jQuery Mobile is, if you look here on the left here, most of you probably couldn't tell that's not an iOS app. That is HTML5, and jQuery Mobile. So out of the box, it's part of the ecosystem of jQuery. I don't know how many people have heard of that before, but that's an important framework in the web. It's HTML5 and CSS3. So it's very easy for us to define HTML and tell it, when you're on an iPhone, make it look like this. When you're on an Android device, make it look like this. If you're on a desktop, make it look like this. Or if you're on a Windows phone, we'll make it look like the Windows phone. It also includes the ability, something we're going to talk about a little bit more here, is this thing called responsive design support, which means if you look at a mobile device, one of the big changes from a desktop is you can turn it. And the user experience changes when you do that. Well, that's not necessarily a very easy thing to do in traditionally by hand. You write it all yourself. So using a framework, jQuery Mobile, makes it much easier for you to respond to those changes and also, just in HTML, customize what you want to happen. So it's very powerful. And it also sort of tied into all this stuff is when you want to build a mobile native application, it's not a traditional web app. You may be disconnected. You may want to be able to work to save things on the computer. HTML5 and jQuery Mobile, those make those things possible for you to do that. So again, you can offer them more and more user experience they expect a native app, but you also get the advantage of the mobility of the web, which means if I change a page on the server, it's very easy to sync it. It's already built into the browser. The other nice thing about it, and I already briefly touched on this, it's very easy for even you guys, user experience, and definitely for visual designers, to go to jQuery Mobile's website and actually customize the look and feel. You see here, the buttons, these are the iOS version of the buttons, but you can very easily change not the style of the structure of the buttons, but the colors and things like that. And once you save that off, as a developer, you can hand it off to me, and we can plug those colors in a matter of minutes. The other nice thing about it is it's adaptive. So again, if it's an Android device, it will try to make it look like Android buttons. If the drop-down comes down, they'll look like Android buttons, or they will behave the combo box to do an Android. Versus if it's iOS, they'll behave like iOS things. So again, the idea of this talk was, how does the enterprise take and build mobility into their applications without learning 6 different platforms? So what is responsive design? So I like responsive design a little differently than maybe you guys do or visual designers. It's a couple different things. Obviously, first, it's the viewport's different. When it's a mobile device, I want to show this kind of stuff. When it's on the phone, I'm going to show more kind of stuff. If it's landscape or portrait, again, it's going to need to adaptively change. You also, though, have the idea that even on a desktop, you have sometimes responsive designs. Think about the modern desktop. You may have 2 monitors that are 23 inches wide, where even 5, 10 years ago, everyone would have had 1 monitor. They'd be constricted to 1024 by 768. We all kind of fit into that little world. So whereas responsive design comes from a developer point of view is we need to understand not just responsive design for mobility, but also for our traditional desktop apps too, and how to respond and change things. The other thing we're trying to do is, because we're building an HTML5 app, we want it to work across all these different platforms, we need a very easy way for how it adapt. Because again, we don't want to have to write 4 or 5 different solutions. We want one solution. It's not a silver bullet. There are challenges in making this work. There's caveats always. But it's a good starting point to get you started. The other thing it kind of gives us is, when the web was designed, it was designed for very flat stuff. You have a list of data, you link off to another list of data. It was never designed for this kind of stuff. So in other platforms, we have this idea of what we call a fluid grid. It's very easy the sort of responsiveness is built into the platform. With the web, it wasn't. So we have to be able to design this stuff much easier. The other caveat you need to handle is assets, particularly images or videos. You want different images sizes, but also different resolutions. If you have a iOS Retina display versus older iOS, the images need to be different. So you need to be able to handle all that stuff. And responsive, that's sort of all the encompass of what responsive design is. So where does that fit into the jQuery mobile world? Well, jQuery mobile, now this is the only slide that has code, in case carry you away. You very easily could do all this by hand yourself. I could open up Notepad or whatever HTML editor I want, start typing HTML, start putting all my CSS and stuff in, but it's going to take me weeks to get started. Where jQuery mobile, if I want a nice responsive grid layout, it's already built into the framework. So I won't get into too many details, but basically on the left, we define our HTML, and we say we're going to use these sets of styles. Those styles come with jQuery mobile out of the box. And then on the right, the way that works is, in CSS, we have this idea we call media queries. So we say, when it's this resolution, behave this way. When it's a different resolution, or landscape versus portrait, behave a different way. Tying it a little bit back to what you guys do with information architecture, you also have different information you want to show the user, right? If it's a phone, you can't show them a grid with 40 columns, though I'm sure your customers probably ask you to. I used to have customers ask me to. But you also need to be able to take something here, the same information, but now it's flat. You're going to scroll down now instead of scroll right. Or you may use icons and things that tell you, all right, if you're tracking a patient's heart rate or something, you can easily show icons or something on the mobile experience, well, maybe on the desktop you're showing the roll number, letting them do something else with it. If you want to learn more, the first thing is obviously HTML5. There is lots of misinformation about what is HTML5, what is not HTML5. There is no web browser today that is 100% HTML5 compliant. So if you really want to bore yourself and have some very long, heavy reading, you can go to the W3 Consortium. There's where they're the keeper of the HTML5, which is now 5.1, according to their website. Don't read it. It will drive you nuts. Because one of the big challenges with the web is it's a recommendation. When Google or Apple or Microsoft get this spec, they're like, I don't want to implement that, or I want to implement it a different way. Or many times what they'll say is, we suggest you do it this way. It's not a very concrete set of rules. But again, if you wanted the overall perspective of what it is, there you go. HTML5 Rocks is a good place to go to see examples of what people are doing with the mobile web in general, or just HTML5 in general. And if you want to, if you're at a case where you want to build a mobile web application, and your developer's like, well, I don't know what browsers are supported or what doesn't work, you can go to this site called HTML5 Test, and it will tell you, for this browser you're running, this is what you're compliant. And these are the things that work and don't work, and how well they work. Again, there's another great site for demos if you want to see HTML5 demos. On the jQuery mobile world, jQuery mobile is one of about 50 different frameworks you could use. The benefits jQuery mobile has over the other ones is it's very visual centric. Some of the other frameworks are trying to solve a different problem. So it said, what we showed you, it has all the styling built in to make it look like an iOS app or an Android app. It's very geared towards being able to make it look very easy to do offline and disconnected modes and things like that. So we can go to jQuery mobile. They also have their own sets of demos. And of course, I work for Infragistics. We provide jQuery mobile type solutions, both from our D3 services, but then we also have a product here. So you could, if you wanted to find out more about what our products can do in the mobile space and HTML5 space, if you go to NightUI.com. So that's really all I had to cover. I could spend 4 more hours telling you everything about how HTML5 works, but I think you'll all be bored. But any questions about anything, really, in general? In the desktop, it's very easy for us to create what we call a multi-threaded application. It can perform lots of different actions. Web browsers were never designed for that. They were sort of built around this concept of, I have to go back to the server for every request, things like that. So the pieces being built into web browsers to do that are kind of lacking right now. And so there's technology coming to do that kind of stuff. The other big thing is, depending on what device you have, the amount of things you can save to the local storage is different, or what you can do with that. In the mobile landscape, they're pretty cutting edge in the HTML5 world. So most of them support pretty much everything you would normally need. There's some other things. Being able to, one of the other big things that's coming in the next year or two is being able to actually talk to the local device, the camera, the speedometer, and the other things you normally would have in a native platform. There is some stuff that sort of works in, actually I think it works in Firefox now, but the different platforms and things, they're building it actually into the web browser to give you capabilities. If you do decide you need those capabilities, what you have to do today is that hybrid. I kind of highlighted a little bit. And there's a couple technologies. PhoneGap is one of them. Well, what it does is it provides an API framework, a JavaScript framework that we use to talk to the local device, the camera, the local picture library, things like that. So at the high level, that's sort of what's there and that's coming. But like I said, we're really at the beginning. This is like, there's 100 more days to come. But in web terms, that could be 3 months. This is an interesting thing. So if it's a mobile web app, no app store. That's one of the advantages that some people see, because then you're not bound by their contracts, you're not bound by the approval process and things like that. But then obviously you don't get the benefits either, which is the being able to have them advertise your stuff and things like that. So that's again where the hybrid solution comes in. You could take something like PhoneGap, you're actually building a native app. You write all your UI and your HTML and things like that, and when you're done, you package it all up and you send it to the Apple Store or the Android Store the same way you normally know an app. I've been told, yeah, they're kind of going to change a lot of their stuff. Even on the Android devices, they're still looking at more how to use HTML5 to build native apps. Microsoft is doing the same thing. A lot of people now are trying to look at how they can use Windows HTML5 and JavaScript to build Windows 8 applications that again would get installed in their store. I suspect Apple will, at some point, will try to comply. For now, there are technologies like PhoneGap, and there's some other ones where we can use to do that same thing. The other side is some people don't want to be in the store. I work with corporate America, so trying to put things in the store don't always work, or you would have to host your own store. As I sat back here and started listening to talks, I'm like, I know exactly the talk I want to do next year. Which is, from my perspective as a developer, walk you guys through is, what do we do with a wireframe? How do we think about what we need to build from that? So the first thing would basically be is, wireframes tend to give you what I call the happy day scenario. They tend to not avoid, but there's just never enough time to give you every possible case. So as a developer, we live in a very dynamic world. A picture is static. It doesn't ever have to fail. It doesn't ever have to deal with what happens when the user wants to type in an 80-character name, but there's only 20 characters on the screen. So anything to do with, I guess you'd call it, I hate to say the word real world, but scenario-based solutions. If you have, I always equate it this way. I need to know the most severe solution, I need to know the least severe solution, and a bunch of stuff in between. Because as a developer, we always try to solve this problem, because we can say, we need to make 1 million records work. Well, no one's ever bringing 1 million records back to their phone. It's never going to work. And we also try to solve the easy problem. Well, no records came back, because that's easy to solve. It's in the middle where you have to understand things. So basically it would be scenario-driven stuff, understanding not just the picture, but understanding what the user wants to do with things. How do they interact with the stuff? We see buttons and grids and stuff on the screen, and we start thinking, oh, that's easy. Well, no. In order to do that, the user needs to do A, B, and C. So that would answer your question? I mean, it's too hard to explain it in a 3-second answer. But the more information, the better. Developers like information. The reason why I brought up jQuery Mobile is a lot of times when I have to build a mobile application, people are like, it's just a mobile application. That should take 2 weeks, right? They don't understand the 100 steps that need to happen. So jQuery Mobile is a good starting point. It's not a solution, but it's like, instead of me spending 3 weeks doing the visual design aspect and CSS, I can get that sort of for free. Going to get serially technical with you right now. There is a huge wave in the web world. We start to bring some of the same things we do on the desktop to the web world, and there's a number of frameworks. One of the popular ones out there is now backed by Google. It's called Angular, and it's called a single-page application framework. jQuery Mobile can do that too, but it only does a piece. jQuery UI and jQuery Mobile are very focused on the UI aspect of things. There's other aspects of the application where we need to be able to talk back to the server. We may be able to have to talk to a remote server. We might need to handle error handling and those things. These other frameworks are more standard frameworks. So in the Microsoft world, we have something called .NET. So when I install my developer tool, I have a very rich platform that gives me 1,000 ways to do things. When I go to the web, know what I get? A button, a list, text box. It's all really HTML is. So we have to write all the heavy lifting to make all that possible. So jQuery came about to make it easier for developers to do the heavy lifting, particularly across different browsers. Then we have jQuery UI. It says, all right, well, web needs grids, they need trees, they need charts. jQuery Mobile is trying to solve that problem from a UI point of view. Every framework tries to solve it the same way, but it's how well it solves it and what you're trying to do. Like I said, PhoneGap. PhoneGap was one that's very popular when you want to build this hybrid application. It's a framework that does a bunch of things. It gives us access to the local devices. So there is no one size fits all. As I consult with a lot of companies, I tell them it's like soup. So when you first come to a customer and they're like, I need to build a web app, or I need to build a mobile app, you look at all the thousands of libraries out there, throw a bunch into a pot, stir them around, and hope they work, because they're not all compatible. Or the other bigger challenge is the answer today will be different in 3 weeks or 3 months. Dojo, we probably talk about that. I don't remember too many people using Dojo anymore, unless they have an existing application. So there are tons and tons and tons of frameworks out there that solve problems pretty well. Some do good things, some don't do so good things. As a developer, it's important to understand when to use them and how to use them, because you can't just throw technology at a solution. It doesn't solve the problem. A NightUI is a HTML5 jQuery controls. We have grids, charts, trees, all those kind of things. It's equivalent to what you can do in WPF, but you do it in a web browser. That answer your question? Yeah. So but it's also, because we're talking about mobile web here, those same things can be utilized on a phone device. And then we actually have controls that are more geared towards the phone. We have sliders and video players and list boxes and lists and things that are more what you get in an iOS phone device, those kind of things. So and then we have other products that do iOS and Android, so we have a whole mobile solution. So the first thing I have to do with Wireframe is someone comes to me, Justin, by the way, is our PM, so he was teasing me before. But the first thing him and I need to do is we look at the wireframe and go, how long is it going to take? What's involved with doing that? So that's the first most important question. What it is, how we're going to do it. So as a developer, wireframes, for the most part, can be designed independent of if it's a desktop versus web. Where you guys get more involved is if it's a phone versus a device. You don't care necessarily that say we're doing it native or with mobile web. You have to do different things there. So the first thing I look at a wireframe, I ask myself 3 questions. What's the user trying to do from a functional standpoint? So are they trying to automate a business process? Are they trying to upload files? Are they trying to send an email? What are they trying to do? So we take the wireframe sort of as information into that point of view. And then we have to say, all right, well, what do they want to do? And then how do they do it? Like, how would we make it happen? So for example, if someone says, I want to build a report, all right, that's a very common thing people want to do. I need to figure out what data they need, how to aggregate the data, what they want to do with it when they're done. Because usually they don't just want to look at it on a screen. They want to export it to Excel. They might want to use the data to figure out to do something else in the data. So like I talked before, is we have to take the wireframes and understand the 30 scenarios that potentially can come out of those wireframes and what they want to do with them. As far as desktop or mobile, the bigger question here is the size of the phone or the device. Whether it's web or desktop, those lines are getting very blurred. The user has the same expectation. Whether they don't care if it's a website. They want to be able to do the same thing that Amazon or eBay lets them do. So the days of just putting a grid up and saying, here, you have a grid, you're done, ain't going to work anymore. Did I answer your question?
Well, not really.
Okay, sorry.
The problem is somebody handing me a wireframe, they have an idea of how they expect things to be laid out and function.
Yeah.
And then when you put that on a small device, you can't do it that way.
No.
And then you're going to give them back something which doesn't look anything like what they asked you for.
So that's why it's very important when you deal with mobility. If I get a wireframe and I ask the question, okay, it's only on desktop, they're like, no, this has to work on a phone, I say, well, stop. Yeah. There are 2 important things. Mobility means something, which usually means they can be disconnected, which means I may not be physically connected to the data, or I may lose connectivity. Second most important thing is touch. And very traditional Windows applications, what do they use? They use grids, combo boxes. They don't work very well with a touch finger.
Nor does hover.
Huh? What'd you say?
Nor does hover.
Yeah, we're hover, yes. So I actually worked on a mobile application back in 1998. And you can all blame me if you ever get a ticket in New Jersey, because it was for the police, the New Jersey State Police. And they wanted the same thing back then. They wanted a mobile, touch-enabled device. And we kept trying to explain to them, grids don't work. You got fingers, can't just touch a finger. You have to be able to change the user experience. What I think is the more challenging thing is they want the same information. They don't necessarily need a grid with 40 fields, they want the same information. So if you could be able to use icons or other things to do that, give them the information they need. There's what is it called? I forget what it's called now. It's called gaming. There's called, I can't remember what the name's called now. But there's an idea of gamification. If you look at Facebook or some of these other things, or Twitter, they have all these gamification things built in, where they can win achievements and those kind of things. Those same type of things can be brought into the business world where you can keep track of things or be able to show things. Like being able to just put a green arrow or up, or red arrow down, can tell you so much more information than seeing a negative % or a positive %. It's not necessarily that the UX is not quantifying the information that you have. It's that you didn't get all the answers from the customer. I'll give you a perfect good example of something I'm dealing with now. We have a case where we say we have a grid. There's a bunch of information below the grid that the user's going to enter in. Well, in order to enter all the information in, we need certain fields. But the wireframe said these fields are being removed. Well, in order for them, the calculation to work, we needed those fields. And now 3 months later, when we go to build the screen, we're like, well, how do we do the calculation? And the customer's like, well, we need those fields. Well, at some point, you made a decision to remove them for some reason, or to move them for some reason. So I think probably the most important thing, and this is more of the developer needs to be proactive with it, we have to ask the right questions. We just can't look at a screen, a wireframe, or even a screen and say, it's a grid, it's easy, or it's a button, it's easy. We have to start thinking about what is the business process, what's involved, because then we'll ask you guys questions you can then get from the user. More information is better. The understanding scenarios, I think, is really the key. Understanding when the user does X And validation happens. Not that there's validation, what's involved with that validation? What triggers it? What's the positive and negative? The other thing is, like I said, a button that says send email, there's a lot more involved. We need to understand the structure of the email, how they're sending it, how often they send it. The other big thing that we always seem to run into is the wireframes designed with perfectly good data. The users always have longer names that don't fit, or they have to translate into different languages. So being able to have common anecdotes for how to handle like longer names, error handling, that kind of stuff, because as the developer, we have to worry about everything failing, not just the happy day scenario. One of the nice things about working at Infragistics, with our group, is we collaborate. We don't just let the UX people go off and create all these wireframes. We spend at least a few hours every week trying to understand what you want to do, trying to understand what the customer wants to do, and being able to say, all right, yeah, we want X and Y controls to do things. We can obviously build those with the right time and material and things. But a lot of the customers have this like idea that it's easy to do something. So collaboration is number one. Number two, understanding the value. One of the things I learned, I've been doing consulting a very long time. There's lots of ways you can, we talked about this, the sales guy talked about this too a little bit. Providing value to the customer as a consultant, that's your job. I write code for a living, but I'm a consultant. That means I have to come in and just talk to the customer, or help them understand what they want to do and things like that. Getting a little off track from your question. The idea is the developer and the UX people, we need to collaborate and we need to understand the end result. There's a great thing in Agile called user stories. User stories, the idea of user story is it has a single quantitative result. I hit a button, an email gets sent. That's all you need in that user story. Now from that, you guys got to build the screen. Maybe you have to give them a dialogue to put in the information. We need to build that dialogue. We didn't need to send an email. But that's ultimately what they want to do. So being able to change the perspective from, I think UX is you guys are thinking about how the user interacts with something. As a developer, I'm thinking about how to build it. We both need to take a step back and say, what are they trying to do? Like when I go to Amazon, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to buy something. So I need to find it as fast as possible. Or if I'm going to, they talk about the car dealership. I go to a car dealership. I want to get in and out as fast as possible. Collaboration, I think, is just communication, collaboration. The other thing important, though, is we have to get the customer. We have to change the culture of the customer, which is not a very easy thing to do. Because most customers, they live in a world where they know what they do. They know their business process. And they just want a solution. They don't understand that you have to tell us everything we need, or we're not going to build you the right solution. So collaboration between all three of us, and then information. I think one of the areas where we need to figure out how to best weight information, I used to write 200-page specs. That's really hard to write 200-page specs, but no one reads them. So we got to find a way to get the same information between ourselves even, and also to the user. Okay, you're turning everything off. We have to be able to quantitate the information into something that's much easier. So I like pictures. One of the things I like about UX is you guys define the picture. I don't have to spend the 3 months trying to put the buttons and breaking everything here. So that picture gives me a starting point. What I then do with that picture is I think about how to break it apart and understand the pieces. Because I need to understand, all right, well, this tree does this, and when they click on this button, these 5 things have to happen. So, but collaboration, I think, is the #1 thing.